So welcome everybody to the Bradford Island Round, to our July meeting. Thanks for joining tonight. We will open the meeting here at 5:05 p.m. Go ahead to the next slide, please. This is our mission as usual, providing the open forum for collaboration and good, honest dialogue. Moving on to the next slide. This will be our agenda tonight. Our main focus tonight will be going over the Phase 2 River Work Plan and talking about the upcoming sampling event for that. We'll also be doing some of our regular RAB business, providing regular status updates. Right along to our next slide, please. I'll open us up with the roll call. I think I see everybody's here, but I'll go ahead and run down the list. Christy, Valerie, present. Asa,
Here.
Carl,
Here.
Kate Murphy let me know shortly before this meeting will not be able to attend tonight. Mitch,
Here.
Jennifer, and Andrea.
Here.
Thanks all for joining. We do have a quorum. So these are our RAB business topics for today. Old business will be going over the community co-chair role and seeing if there is any interest now that we've been able to hold a training for our existing RAB members. Then we'll have also our approval of minutes and discussing the ground rules for communication that was sent out about a month ago to our RAB members. Before we proceed on to the next slide, we don't have a separate slide for May 2025 minutes. So I will open it up for a motion to either approve the minutes or have any discussion that we need to have about them. Questions, comments from our RAB members? No, I'll make a motion to approve the May 2025 RAB minutes. Have a motion. Do you have a second?
This is Asa. I second.
Okay, a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstain?
Abstain, Mitch.
Okay.
Didn't get a chance to read them.
Gotcha. Okay, we have one abstain, 4 ayes. The ayes have it. Let's move right along. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting into the RAB co-chair. We had a request at the May RAB to have a training session for our RAB members to talk about the co-chair role. So we conducted that in June. Just to briefly touch upon what we discussed in that meeting, the main duties of the co-chair are to help encourage good community participation, constructive dialogue at these meetings. We do ask that they help us with coordinating the agenda for any topics or questions or concerns that come up from meetings or come up between member conversations or even conversations they have out in the community. And then they also facilitate the RAB meetings. Members can nominate themselves. You can also nominate each other. And if there is any issues or reservations with serving long-term, we have had interim co-chairs before, and we can certainly do that again. If it makes people feel more comfortable, we can set an interim co-chair for a certain amount of time, see how it goes, and then reassess at a specific amount of months down the road. So I think that's pretty much all old news. I will open it up for any nominations at this point. Any discussion, questions that the RAB members want to have regarding the co-chair role?
We got any, this is Mitch, Pat. Have we got any more applications for even RAB members? in the last few months.
We had gotten an indication from someone expressing interest. I think it was actually the person you had talked to. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on their name. We did send over the application, but we haven't got a filled one back yet.
I know
And
I've spoken to quite a few different people that said that they were interested. That's why I wonder if anybody ever followed through.
one person did follow up and ask for an application, but we hadn't gotten a filled one from them, and no others had reached out. Oh, and I just want to make sure before we proceed, is y'all the mic on? Just so folks can hear you okay. There should be a button on one side of the mic or another that you can press, and it'll have a little screen and stuff. Awesome. So no, just to recap the question, for if anyone didn't hear, the question was if we had had any further applications for RAD membership. No, we've not.
I wonder if, this is Mitch Patton again, I wonder if we were to have like the city councils, our board of county commissioners start adding that to their agenda to maybe to get that application out to people, that would somehow help us fill the positions that we need.
Yeah, potentially. Certainly would hurt.
We're not getting any applications. It almost feels like nobody knows it's even there.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is a much bigger step to go from listening in on these meetings, serving on the board, but I see your point that like I know there's an interest in having more members in general. More about like an ideal number. I think we had said it like 11 or 15 or something more. Well, no.
I think that, Valerie here, I think that's a good idea. I know, 'cause I had served on like the city planning commission for years, and when I rolled off, there was another appointment that came up, and they called me to see if I was interested, and I ended up getting a different board. So they might have folks that maybe had served on city council, or served on a planning commission, or with the, as far as the county commissioners, people that they know served and maybe rolled off a board might be interested then. And they might have some people of interest that might be interested in doing this. Yeah, because we're kind of short on people. So,
Sure.
yeah.
On the court side, what I would recommend for us to take action on is to reach out to some of the local communities and see if they have any like event boards or anything that we can start posting the meetings to. And then on the RAD member side, if there's particular folks, either it's particular boards or particular folks on your local boards, if you think they could be a good fit or could have interest in this, by all, like, feel free to touch base with those folks. They're welcome to email us if they want more information at the inbox, or we have the website available as well. And then, of course, if they want to see what the RAD's about, we have that full like YouTube playlist from the districts, USACE Portland districts YouTube. There's a good amount of resources for folks if there are specific folks who can reach out to and point them on. Yes.
This is Kelly. How is the audio for people online?
Hey,
I
this is
can
Rich
hear-
Francis, EPA. Oh, I'm sorry. I can hear everybody, but Mitch, you're coming in just a little bit muddled.
Is it any better?
Oh, that's better.
There we go.
Okay,
Awesome.
just want to make sure that's all working. And then as far as the meeting being announced, we got an inquiry today because the meeting was announced on, I think, nextdoor.com. Leslie, are you on the line? If you're on the phone, you can *6 to unmute. There's one person on the phone. Phone number ending 0010. Okay, we just wanted to check on some of this, but apparently there was some neighborhood discussion without providing a link. So someone reached out to the Hedgewell Center for the link, and I sent it to them prior to.
Let's take an action to see, both for the Edgewell Center, if they have like an online event that we can post our meeting information to. And then for the local city, county commissions in the area, if they have then like online event stuff that we can send that information.
Okay.
If nothing else, even we can send the Teams link, even in cases where we don't have the next in-person
Right.
set, so that that data would be available for folks months ahead of time.
This is Mitch Patton again. I posted that on the next door. And I tried to go to the link that I was sent for the meeting. And generally there was like a little tab that you could copy and paste or add to my posting, but for whatever reason, this time I couldn't get it. So then I even typed in RAB meetings, Bradford Island RAB meetings, and it brought me back to a page. But it really didn't have a good link, and the last meeting that was posted was April 11th or something, so quite a ways back. So if the meeting packet had that link, because I know I've seen it before, because I posted it. Like this time, I couldn't find it, for whatever reason, I couldn't repost that link to get to the Zoom meeting, this meeting today. So I could make sure that that's attached to that meeting.
I'll take a look at the meeting announcement that you all get, make sure that, at least on my side, that looks good.
And I just may have overlooked. Remember looking, and trying to find it.
It is a very full email for the announcement.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it's our standard, try to give everybody all the info they need, but especially if you're looking quick, I can see where to get it. I see a question from Asa. Go ahead, Asa.
Yeah, if it's all right, I can post this meeting on the information bar on the county website. I just gotta, run it by the other commissioners, make sure it's okay, but we can add it to our webpage for the announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sharing meeting information is always appropriate from RAB members, or really any member of the community who gets this information. If you see a resource that you might want to spread the information, it's absolutely fine. I will say that the more we post links publicly, the more likely we do have security incidents like we have had in the past. But we understand that there's the risk that we need to take to get more people involved. And we do have more security controls in place now to help with that. But I do want to bring us back to RAB co-chair. It does sound like we do not have anyone interested in this time of nominating another RAB member. We're self-nominating. Unless anyone wants to correct me.
Well, I mean, I don't want to, Valerie here, I don't want to throw Ace under the bus, but at the last training, he said he's pretty good at Robert's, roles, so maybe he'd be willing to take a stab at it. I'm not nominating him. I'm not going to completely throw him under the bus, but he does have his hand up.
Asa, do you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I'd be willing to serve as interim until a community member felt comfortable in the meetings to do it. I'd be willing to do that. I just don't feel comfortable being in a government position and then also being the community co-chair, because I think that should be a community position. Thank you.
For interim service, would you like to set a specific time where we revisit that assignment?
I'd be comfortable with no more than 6 months, since our meetings are every other month until they start ramping up.
Can I consider that a motion to self-nominate yourself as interim co-chair for 6 months?
Yes.
There is a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Valerie here, I'll second that.
Okay. For this, we will do a roll call vote. You are welcome to vote yay, nay, or abstain. So I'm gonna start with the list that I just see online. Andrea,
Yes.
Asa,
Or yay.
Yes.
Carl,
Yes.
Valerie,
Yes.
and Mitch.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes. Welcome to our new interim community co-chair, Asa.
You,
And yes, thank you in advance for your service. I know it's a big commitment and it's greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and move right along. We have plenty to discuss today. So next on our RAB business is discussing the RAB rules for RAB communication. Excuse me, the ground rules for RAB communication. To recap, this is a document we've actually had in our binders for our members for a long time. And in preparing for the community co-chair training that we had last month, I couldn't find any indication that this had ever been voted on. But typically RABs do have some ground rules for how folks communicate with each other, both at meetings and then in any, of course, like one-on-ones together as well. So I'll just really briefly summarize these. These were sent out to RAB members for their consideration about a month ago. Starting with number one, meetings we try to end and start on time. We can shorten or lengthen as needed. We try to stick to our topics for presentation discussion. We always have something on the list to talk about, and we try to keep on topic. And we always try to leave time for discussion and public comments. We keep our dialogue respectful. Essentially, we're just trying to keep any defensiveness or accusatory tones out of our speaking, and then try not to assume any malintent on each other. Always assume that we have the best intentions going into the room. Always trying to have one meeting, so one person talking at a time, not trying to talk over each other or have separate side discussion. The core meeting minutes are an official record, and we do record an official record always for the admin record, so we do post meeting minutes online. Necessary decisions, we always try to make by consensus. There's very few occasions where we would need to make a decision not by consensus, and usually that's typically if just the core or other requested agency couldn't perform what's asked of them. Once we make a decision, we ask that all members support that. We ask that no one come with any sort of surprise or secret to the meeting, that they be willing to share information with everybody and try not to gotcha each other by any means. And then finally, we just ask for folks to identify themselves before they speak. That helps us maintain the record of who is saying what and avoid any confusion in our minutes. So at this point, I'll open it up to RAB members. Is there anything in the ground rules that you would suggest either changing, altering, adding, deleting?
This is Mitch Patton. On number 4, I see the no sign. I kind of get what you're saying, that during the meeting, you don't want to have a bunch of people chattering at the table, but it also means that the way that I read it is you can't have a side conversation outside this meeting about this.
Oh, no, it's not outside the meeting.
It's just here at the table.
Yes. We could add some language in there if you think that would help clarify, such as no side conversations within the meeting.
That would seem more clear to me.
Can we make a note to add that, please? Oh, thank you. I see Ace's hand up.
Yeah, on number 6, we do have some RAB members that are part of other organizations. I would just like to see that, yes, support the decisions, but also I don't want to limit them voicing concerns with their other organizations. I just thought maybe we could craft that a little friendlier, in consideration of those other organizations that may not always agree with what the Army Corps of Engineers is doing or their decisions, but there's a way to respectfully express concerns. I'm just not maybe not smart enough on how to craft that for number 6. Thank you.
I see what you're saying. I don't have an initial decision myself, but we could work on crafting something, unless anyone else has an idea of how to reword that.
Yeah, Valerie here, that's the one that bothered me a little bit, because if I even vote no on something, but then I'm expected to support a decision and I absolutely directly against, I would likely not do that, and the Constitution's behind me on that. So.
I got you. Kelly, did you have a point?
RAB members or RABs as a group are often not run by consensus, but by inclusion. So I can look at some wording we have for other teams.
Okay.
And propose a new item number 6 for the ground rules.
Okay, so let us take that away. We'll work some alternate language that will try not to make it sound like you're not allowed to have your own opinion. And then we will come back at a future RAB meeting with some new language to propose. Any other items that folks wanted to talk about before we move on from this one?
That Mitch Patton, on number 7, no surprise, secret, but it's kind of a broad statement. If I'm walking into the meeting or somebody calls me before or something must be brought up, wouldn't that be a surprise?
I mean, if you're coming to the table with information and offering that publicly to all, I wouldn't consider that necessarily a surprise. That's just presenting new information
Well,
to.
then what would you consider a surprise? What would your definition be?
I guess I view this particular one as there is information being withheld that is relevant to the conversation. I don't have like a specific example of like what that might necessarily be.
Valerie here, I'm wondering if we could just, strike no surprises or secrets, because really you're just saying we want if someone calls us for something important, we would want to come to the next meeting, might even email you, present that information.
That's what my suggestion.
Yeah.
It just it doesn't sound good. It sounds like he tells you something. You haven't let anybody know here, then it's a surprise.
I got you. Yeah.
Honestly, that number 7 looks, this is Rich Francis, EPA. Honestly, that number 7 looks to me like something that Army Corps would be beholden to, right? That's like Army Corps doesn't have any secrets and they're openly sharing information. I don't think it necessarily applies to all RAB members unless there's some litigation that you're planning that may affect work and something like that. That's probably something that would be pertinent to the group and that you wouldn't want to, withhold. But beyond that, I couldn't think of any secrets that the RAB members would have.
Yeah, I can't think of like an example that I would expect a RAB member to withhold certain information. Typically, you're coming here to ask us questions, share concerns, so it's a bit countered that someone would withhold. That said, do folks feel like just striking the words "no surprises or secrets" would be sufficient for this one, for number 7?
I would say, yeah, strike that first part of that. The rest of it seems,
Sufficient.
yeah.
It explains it well.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we'll do that. Any other notes on these ground rules? Not seeing any hands up from our RAB members or anything in the room. From our community members, any folks either online or here with us in person, do you have any questions or thoughts regarding ground rules or communication? Not hearing any. So we have a few notes that we have made here in the room, and then we'll come back at the next meeting with new language for number 6. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to jump into talking about site status. For those who have been with us for a while, I hope you will bear with me a little bit. I'm going to try to be a little bit more high level and descriptive as I talk about site status. At the last meeting, some folks noted that they still felt it was a little too deep technically, that it was a little difficult to understand. So I'm going to try to explain things a little bit more, and I'll try to still be brief so I don't bore anyone and that I keep us on a nice time schedule. So we're starting out with talking about our upland operable unit. And for any not familiar, operable unit at this site refers to an area that we're investigating. It has certain geographical bounds that can change over time. In this case, we're talking about Bradford Island itself, the actual west side, or excuse me, the east side of the island are the current bounds. And there's some investigations happening outside those bounds as well. We're currently in the supplemental remedial investigation phase. Remedial investigation looks at the nature and the extent of contamination on site. We had actually performed one some time ago. It did not quite answer everything we needed it to, so we're doing a supplemental remedial investigation today. We do have some on-site sampling happening at the end of the month. Going into August, we will be sampling some wells that are on site, taking samples of the groundwater there and looking at potential contamination in those areas. For most of our wells, this is the second time we'll be sampling the groundwater. We did install a new well back in May, and for that particular one, it'll be its first sample. Under our work plan for this supplemental remedial investigation, we do 2 samples, so we will be looking at that other well a little later, probably late this year or early next year. We'll have to figure out the time for it. But at this point, we have most of the data collected. It's being validated and being assessed. We also have a non-time critical removal action that we're planning for. So this removal action is to actually go on site at the upland operable unit and remove contamination from different areas around Bradford Island. Right now, we are working on an action memo, which is essentially an authorized document. It basically authorizes us to perform the action that we're proposing and allows us to award contracts to bring someone on board to perform that work. So the regulators and the tribes have gone through the document and provided their comments to us. We have provided back responses to their comments, and they are going through those responses to comments now. We had asked them to finish their check by the end of this week. So hopefully by next RAB meeting, we will have a just finalized document. That is our current schedule. We are still on track to award the contract for the non-time critical removal action by the end of this fiscal year, which is basically the end of September, with the plan to start our on-site activities in spring of 2026. So there's quite a lot of work that goes into the contract, including developing a work plan that will really go through the requirements of what we're proposing to do. And then we're projecting right now that by spring of next year, we'll actually have a contractor on the ground removing contamination. Any questions regarding upland?
Yeah, that's Mitch Pat.
Hi, Mitch.
Hey, I'm just wondering on the Bradford Island wells, do we have anything? I know we've seen them at one point. Do we have anything now that tells us what those depths of those wells were?
The depth of the wells?
Yes.
We probably do have that information. I don't have that available here. We installed some wells, so I know we can quite easily get the information on how deep those are. And there's some existing wells. I have to figure out where that is.
But that'll probably be, if you have the information of the studies, probably have that in the actual depths.
The depths of the wells.
Yeah, for your monitoring that you were just talking about.
I mean, I think we have that information available. I just don't have it here to present today, is what I'm saying.
Then the other question I have, Bradford Island, I'm assuming it would be the easterly end of that island that's not there any longer, that got removed during
Dredging?
the dredging for the elevator locks. Do we know how much of that island actually disappeared?
How much was dredged out? I would probably need to go into old records to see that exactly. We do have some sampling happening in that area as part of the Phase 2 River Work Plan, which we'll talk about in more depth after our site status.
Then I guess the third question I have on that, will the RAB members or the public be allowed to see what is awarded to the contractor on that cleanup?
Do you mean like the details of like who it's awarded to, or?
How much money was spent on it?
I don't know if the award amount does get publicized. I would have to look into that. It's been a little while since I awarded a big contract like that.
I'm just curious to see how much money being spent there.
Hey, Megan, this is Rich Francis. I think I think you disclose who your contractor is, but you don't give them principal names or anything like that. Just like, we know who's running, who's facilitating the RAB right now, and who your principal contractor is for the design and stuff like that. I think it's still run the same thing. And Mitch, to the second question, I think you're talking about Goose Island, right? The area that was excavated to widen the channel for the new lock system to allow for wider ships and more navigation to go into the new lock system. All that material was deposited into what is now Goose Island. And yeah, that's part of the investigation for the in-water work, and one that I'm personally looking forward to.
Right. So my question is, because some of the old aerial photos that I looked at, it looks like there's a pretty good hunk of that easterly tip, the upstream, I call it, of Bradford Island that's missing. But I don't have anything to really scale it off of to say, okay, here's a navigational buoy to scale back from to see how much that island's actually missing. It'd be the southeasterly side of the island. The westerly side where the bulk slope is seems to be still normal.
The normal, the southeasterly edge is what was removed to create Goose Island and to widen the channel. The eastern part, and people can confirm this, that there is massive erosion going on right there, which is partially why we want to do this non-time critical to remove the landfill, to make sure that we get to it before erosion exposes parts of that landfill. And I think that's what we're seeing on the eastern point. And I know Columbia Riverkeeper, you actually have some videos out there of you're going out to that area where you can see some of that erosion and mass wasting going on right there in that point.
That's what I'm just trying to get my mind around. How many cubic yards are actually missing already?
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
That we wouldn't know in terms of like mass wasting and just that like on a deposition of pulling that natural like river pulling away material, we wouldn't know the amount over the years.
That's all I got.
Thanks, Mitch. Any other questions regarding upland operable unit? All right, let's move along to talk about the river. So this is just a quick status, and then we'll be talking more about Phase 1 and Phase 2 on some future slides. Under the Phase 1 supplemental remedial investigation, so same phase as the upland, the river has had quite a lot of sampling in the last year or so. That data is being evaluated. Some of that data has already been provided to regulators and tribes, especially that sediment data that we had received previously, and we're working on evaluating the rest of that data that we collected. So we can get that over those folks as well. Today we'll also just provide a little bit of background on that phase 1 before we talk about the phase 2 work plan. Under the phase 2 of the supplemental remedial investigation, we have a work plan that has been reviewed by regulators and tribes. We have received their comments, and we're working now on responding to their comments. We'll be talking about kind of a high level of what's in that plan right now. There is quite a lot of detail that's still being worked out, so we won't get down to the detail of seeing like individual sample locations. Those are still being worked between CORE and our reviewers. But we can talk about areas, what kind of methods we're doing, you know, what kind of sample depths and stuff like that we're planning to go to. So we'll talk about that in a couple slides, but until then, any quick questions on the river operable unit? Okay, let's move along. I believe the next slide is for Cascade. Yes. So not much change on Cascades at this point. The preliminary assessment has been finalized. For anyone who's not familiar with circle phases, a preliminary assessment looks into whether there is a potential issue of contamination at a site and makes a decision on whether the party responsible for that site should continue to investigate. In our case, we actually were able to use other studies going on at the same time to confirm that there was some contamination left in place at Cascades Island. So we actually more or less checked the box for a preliminary assessment, understanding that we do have places that we need to continue investigating. And we checked a box for site inspection, where we would typically say, yes, no, there is or is not contamination. So we are proceeding forward into remedial investigation for Cascades. We'll be looking at the nature and extent of contamination on that island at the Cascades at the Bonneville Dam. And it is now a new operable unit of the Bradford Island National Priorities List site. We have a site management plan that gets updated every year. I'll talk about that in the next slide. But it does include information about Cascades Island for this year's revision. Yes.
Valerie, I had a question. Can you just tell us kind of the nature of potential contamination?
Sure. The contamination that we confirmed on site was there is an area called the Hay Care and Storage Pit, which is a part of the dam complex. There was lead contamination of some sand drip that was left there. There was also lead paint on a couple historical buildings on that island as well. So those are the confirmed one. And then there are quite a few other, like a half dozen or more other areas that we'll be investigating for potential sources of contamination.
So is the main source so far likely the sandblast?
Yeah.
Right. It said that Bradford as well. And then the only second comment I had was, I know I don't want to get into a big discussion of this tonight, but whether we are able to potentially change the name, the Bradford Island, because again, we're capturing other islands in the Bonneville complex. So again, I don't want to get into a discussion about that tonight, but I think people now potentially going to have Cascades, we've got the river unit, we've got upland units on Bradford. It looks like we're having other investigations on some of these other areas. So again, I think people would understand it better if it's Bonneville. Yeah, I don't know how hard it is to change the name, but.
Well, I do understand that folks feel strongly, at least in some cases, I know folks have said that they would like to see the name changed to the Bonneville Complex. My understanding is that once the site is listed, the name does not change.
You can't do that. Okay, thank you.
This is Mitch Patton again. I just wondering when did Cascade Island become on your radar? And then also, how many other sites, can you give us the other areas that are more than likely on your radar? Or EPA's radar, I should say, probably.
Well, I can't speak to EPA, what's on their radar. I'll leave that for Rich if he wants to chime in a sec. Cascades, I have to look back at the preliminary assessment to see what the exact history on it is. I believe the work for the preliminary analysis, or the preliminary assessment, I believe that started in 2023, but I'm going off memory here. There is some history listed in the report. We're going through the process of uploading that to the admin record. There's quite a lot of like formatting, readability things that have to happen in the background. So we're in the process of that. It's also a 1,000-page document. It takes a little while. But once that's on the admin record, that information will also be available in that document to read up on.
So I guess the question is probably for Rich then. Are there any other sites in that immediate area that are on EPA's radar?
You mean for concerning Bradford Island? Yeah, I mean, I had said from the beginning that Goose Island was on my radar. I thought it was going to be OU3 until the preliminary assessment came out, and Army Corps had suggested that Cascades Island be OU3. But generally, when EPA is looking at these sites, we're looking at where the source of the contamination is, which we've all pretty much identified as off the shoreline of the east side of Bradford Island, and some characterization to be done along the other side, but also, where that contamination has come to lie. So when you're talking about a groundwater plume, when you're talking about a groundwater site, that's where the groundwater plume's going. When you're talking about a very arid desert site, it's probably where the wind has blown the material if there's been significant erosion. And in a river site, which is where the primary risk is here, it would be where the sediment, any contaminated sediment has come to lie, which is why through erosion and deposition, which is why we're looking at the downstream area particularly. We don't think that there's any sources down in the downstream area. We think that it's probably just the migration of contaminated sediment down there. Hamilton Island I am now the EPA RPM for Hamilton Island, and I've done some pretty extensive investigations into that. We can talk about that a little bit if you want. But there are, Hamilton Island is currently being managed by Washington Department of Ecology. They have institutional controls. And they are implementing them. There are people that are buying up parcels of land on Hamilton Island that are having to do further investigations and even some cleanups. I think that's probably where we try to keep an open mind about where this contamination may have moved to. But as a water resources, person, I'm really looking at sediment transport and where those contaminated sediments have come to lie, which is around Ives Island and down in that downstream area.
And we'll talk about this a little bit more as we talk about the phase 2 work plan, but as we keep investigating, if there are other areas where we identify contamination has been moved to, whether it's through those forces of like sediment traveling down the river or the placement of sediment that created Goose Island, those can be areas that potentially could be new OUs in the future, or new operable units.
This is Michigan. I guess the confusion that I have is that some other people I spoke with, Hamilton Island was a Superfund site. It got deemed safe. But what were the contaminants that were found there? And then also we have Hamilton Island phase 2, which throws a lot of confusion into what Hamilton Island is. And so in Hamilton Island phase 2 or parcel 2 is.
Oh, parcel 2. Okay. Yeah.
I'm just going to interrupt real quick. I apologize. I just want to let folks know, if we're going to talk Hamilton Island, I would recommend we talk that towards the end of the meetings, because we do have quite a lot of information to share today about the phase 1, phase 2 river work plan.
Yeah, I have stuff ready for Hamilton Island. So whenever you're ready for me to jump in on that, I can talk about it.
yeah, if that works, I would recommend we table that for the end of the meeting. Any further question on Cascades before we move on? Do one more site status slide before we start talking deeper on river. All right, move right along. Next slide, please. So last updates for our project before we talk work plan. The site management plan. This is a document that really gets into nuts and bolts of how the project is managed. It talks about different operable units, explains what kind of things are being done there, and then shows milestones for long range over the project. This document gets updated every year. Right now, it is with regulators and tribes for their review. They'll be reviewing until the end of the month. When we get their comments, we'll go through that comment resolution process that we usually do, and then we will be providing it to the RAB afterwards for your review and comment. Expecting that to be available probably around September to October time, right? Pending how long it takes to resolve comments with regulators and tribes.
Yeah, Valerie here. Now that was the SMP that I think the draft came out in May. Is that correct? Because we're talking the same thing.
It probably potentially something different. The site management plan is an overarching document for like the whole site. It gets updated every year. The draft gets sent to regulators and tribes every June 30th.
Okay.
And like I said earlier, Cascade Island being a new operable unit, that's included. So that's one of the major changes. And there will also be changes to some milestones as we continue to find those long-term milestones. Any other site status questions before we talk work plans? All right, let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, so before we get into phase two, I just wanted to provide a quick overview of what we did for phase one of the river. Again, we're under the supplemental remedial investigation phase. We're looking into the nature and extent of the contamination in the river operation. The work plan for the supplemental remedial investigation got broken up into two pieces, primarily due to our contracting limitations. We had another contractor on board at the time of phase one. We did what we could with them, and then we're conducting the rest of it with our current contractor, Jacobs. So to recap, we have completed the sampling for this work plan. It was conducted between February of last year and January of this year. And there were really kind of 4 areas that we were looking at under this work plan. We'll talk about each of these just a little bit more on subsequent slides. But the main areas were the surface sediments along the north and the eastern shores of Bradford Island, stretching out into the river. We did some soil boring samples around the riverbank, especially in the areas that were focused on the areas where we previously had debris waste in the river. There were surface sediments collected around Eagle Creek, including the mouth of Eagle Creek and along close to Kings Island. And we looked at the transportation of sediment in the area as well as the hydrodynamic conditions, in other words, the currents in the area. And we collected that data from when the spillway was open as well as when the spillway was closed. Next slide. So the busy figure that you see in front of you is this was the final version of our potential locations. Real quick, just stop it talking about how sampling gets done, especially sampling in the river. We always set out with a plan of where we're going to sample, and then we adjust to reality as much as we can. There's a lot of reasons that we might need to adjust a sample. In this area, That's especially the case when we don't find sediment. We go down in the river and we find lots of cobbles, stone, or we just find bedrock. So our work plans always include some, a little bit of room to move a sample a little left, a little right. They always have a bit of a radius that we're trying to stick to, so that when we're out in the field, we can make adjustments if divers are not finding sediment, which did happen while we were out there. But we can also make calls between the contractor and the forest technical team. And always when we're making those adjustments, the question that we're trying to answer is, if we make this change, will it still meet the objective of the sampling? So that's our metric for when we make changes in the area. In this case, it was expected that we would really struggle to find sediment. In some places we did, in other places we actually did okay. But we got a very thorough amount of sampling done for this plan. This area is the north and eastern side of Bradford Island. That yellow kind of tip that you see, that's where the landfill is. And that big red area towards the left, that's part of the sandblast area. So we were sampling along that shoreline, the surface sediments down to half a foot. And then the sampling would stretch out off into the river, basically trying to get an idea of what the surface sediment contamination is like as you go further away from the island. Next slide, please. Going into the riverbank soil sampling. So again, the big yellow area you see, that's the landfill on the screen. And if you look off to the left, there's kind of a highlighter green there. That is the bulb slope. Near these areas, for those folks in the room, it's going to be more difficult to see. It might be a little easier for folks online. There are these little kind of white bubbles off the coast of those colored yellows and those greens. These are areas where the Corps had previously placed industrial waste into the river. They were removed back in the 2000s, and then later we came through in the later 2000s and dredged out sediment in those areas. That said, we're continuing to investigate those areas. So those lines of pink you see are where we targeted for soil sampling, essentially going along the riverbank, probing for areas of sediment, and then taking samples along those areas. The soil, as much as we could, went down to 3 feet. We targeted down to 3 feet where we could. And we analyzed at 1 foot intervals. So essentially you had a barge out there poking around, trying to find the pockets of sediment in all of those different boulders and cobbles that make up a very rocky shoreline there. I believe we got a total of 5 samples from that area. I was looking back at the data today. I can't remember exactly if that's the total amount. There wasn't a lot of sediment in that area because the coastline is so rocky. But we were able to gather some data from that area. Next slide. Okay, sediment traps. Unfortunately for those folks in the room, this is really difficult to see where the yellow dots on the screen here, but I'll try to explain as best as I can. So what you see are 2 maps of Bradford Island, the sort of green area that's sticking out in the middle, and then the big block of white on the left side of both pictures is essentially where the spillway is. For sediment traps, they're basically contraptions that collect sediment as it moves through the area as water pushes sediment in different directions. We collected this data while the spillway was open and while it's closed. If you can see the yellow locations on your screen, these represent the intended sample locations. These were out for 90 days for each of the conditions. And the intent of these is to evaluate the sediment as it's being transported in the area. So basically to take samples to see if those samples are contaminated, and if so, what kind of contamination we're seeing within them. And I apologize for folks that are in the room that some of these are a little difficult to see. There are in the phase one work plan, which is on the admin record, there are other pictures that you'll be able to see in greater detail in your computer if you want to take a look later. Moving on to the next slide. So the left side here, this is an actual sediment trap. These get placed in the river at the bottom. You can see a little bit better on the right side, the yellow dots. So those were locations of sediment traps. And then the graphic that you see on the right, again, it's really difficult to see up on the screen in front of us and probably in your printouts as well. But there are arrows showing a direction, or at least what we model the direction of the water to be, in this case, when spillways open. And the darker blue colors represent the slower currents as we have modeled. Those kind of lighter green ones, those are faster. So you can kind of see where those tracks were located versus what we expect currents to sort of be like. Next slide, please. Current meters, very similar, so placed in pretty similar locations, but these current meters are really out for just 30 days. So that's like basically the lifetime of the battery for those, that we can put those out there. And they are measuring the velocity of the current in those areas. So they're pointed in a certain direction and are able to get a feel of current data from each of those locations. Like you saw on the last slide, we do have a hydrodynamic data with what we expect currents to be, and the current meter data we're using to essentially validate that model, make any corrections we need to better understand the currents in the area. And that's for when the spillway is open and when the spillway is closed. That'll definitely change the current quite a lot. Next slide, please. I believe, okay, 2 more slides. This is a close-up of the actual equipment. So the left side is an acoustic Doppler current profiler. What amount of words for a tiny little thing. But it essentially gets put on a stand like you see on the right, and it gets deposited at the riverbed. Last slide for phase one, and then I'll open it up for questions. Last slide is Eagle Creek. So you'll see the pink dots on this slide. Again, a little difficult to see because we also represent other sampling efforts that have happened around Eagle Creek on this picture. But the pink areas are the areas we sampled around Eagle Creek. So there are some that are up the creek, that winding sort of S shape that's in the middle of the picture there. And then we have one that's still up creek, but below the hatchery. We took a sample there. There's a couple of samples. If you follow that winding past the highway, there's a couple of samples there at the mouth. And then the last 2 samples were up and around the Eagle Creek campsite area towards Goose Island. These were, again, surface sediment samples, so looking at down to half a foot. And really what we're looking at here is trying to determine if there's any other sources of contamination that could contribute to that area south of Bradford Island. I know there's the hatchery up there. I think cannot remember offhand what other potential sources there were, but certainly a hatchery can produce contaminants. There can also just be, if there's like logging, there's farming, other stuff like that, there's the potential for other areas. So it essentially just helps us determine what's our background scenario, what other contamination is being introduced that's not from Bradford Island. So those are the areas we looked at. I believe that's the conclusion of the phase one slides. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask before we move on to phase two? Yeah, go ahead.
Landfill, that area on Bradford Island, the idea of where that landfill material came from, dredging chance or where it might have come from.
So I believe the question was, do we know where the landfill material came from? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the landfill was opened back in the 1930s when the dam was being created. And it was predominantly industrial waste from the dam. And then there's also some household waste. There were actual like quarters around that area too, for like guards and other folks.
Potential for a transporter supposed to be part of that landfill.
Yes, well, certainly we did find when we were clearing up those debris areas that I mentioned that are on like kind of that north and eastern side of Bradford Island, we definitely did find transformers and similar industrial equipment there. But there is potential for more industrial waste like transformers in the landfill too. We won't dive in deeply to that today. The landfill is part of the upland operable unit. But the non-time critical removal action that I mentioned earlier, the biggest action that will be taken under that is removing the landfill.
This is Mitch Patton again. Hey, so in the sampling at Eagle Creek comes into the Columbia River west of Goose Island. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's a little difficult to see here. If you look closely, you can kind of see like the tip of Goose Island, but it's a bit south. It comes out a little bit southwest of Goose Island.
But
Goose Island.
okay, yeah, so
Yeah.
Eagle Creek actually is quite a bit below Goose Island itself, where it actually enters.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the Eagle Creek campground, it's just like north of where Eagle Creek comes in. And then from the campground, you can actually see part of Goose Island, like you can see
I was just looking at a map and it shows east of Goose Island, there's a few other small streams that do enter the Columbia River, but east of Goose Island, or any of them have any concerns at all as to being possible?
I mean,
something.
there's certainly possibility that there are other sources in a number of areas along Columbia. As we go along, we'll work to determine what we consider background, which is when we consider what other sources of contamination might be in the Columbia River, what is Bradford Island adding? We want to try to find like kind of the difference between them. We're not there yet in the process, but it'll be later on. We'll have like sampling later on into like the feasibility study, for example, the next phase. That'll help us determine what those background levels of contamination are in the Columbia River, so we can understand better what we're cleaning up to for Bradford Island. In this case, for the river. Eagle Creek being so close, that is, that's why we especially want to understand, because to just sample south of Bradford would not give us a clear picture. We wanted to sample further up Eagle Creek to help get that idea.
I had a question, Valerie here. I mean, I understand what you're doing, like in the creek above that to the east is going to be Ripple, but I mean, there was no agriculture. It would primarily be logging. And logging contaminants, we're just talking sediment. I'm not sure what you're going to gain from your sample. Honestly, it doesn't actually make sense to me.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's essentially just trying to understand if there is any other sources of contamination upriver. Not necessarily that we're trying to pinpoint those, but basically to understand if there is anything coming out of there, that we understand what that looks like. So as we look at the south end of Bradford Island, we understand like, okay, we can start to delineate, okay, here's where we see Bradford Island contamination. We know we have contamination coming out of Eagle Creek if that's the case, when that becomes the case. and then start to delineate exactly where we would know.
I mean, the fish hatchery makes sense to me, but as you're going upstream, I'm not totally following that one, but I guess we'll see.
And I think there was some information in the phase one work plan. I just can't remember
Okay.
if there were other identified sources, what those were.
Okay, thank you.
I should say potential.
Yeah, yeah.
We haven't identified other
Right,
sources
right.
of the river on other people's behalf.
Hey, Megan, this is Rich Francis. I can chime in here a little bit if it helps. So if you notice on the mouth of Eagle Creek, you'll see some previous samples that were taken. Don't pay attention to what the color gradation means. But there were hits for PCBs in some of those locations at the mouth. And it's believed by most of us that that's probably being carried downriver from Goose Island, and that, you know, Goose Island is contaminated, and that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing it kind of just deposit down in there. But because it's at the mouth of Eagle Creek, we just want to make sure that there isn't another contaminant source that's contributing to that. We don't think that there's going to be anything, but when we get into these real technical conversations with the tribes and with the states and with everybody, all the parties involved, there is concern that, you know, maybe there's something that's missed up there, or maybe, you know, there's something else going on up there. So we just want to make sure that, you know, we want to have enough lines of evidence where we can say with some degree of certainty that this is coming from Goose Island, not from Eagle Creek.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions on the phase one river? Chat?
We do have some unidentified people. 2 on the phone, 1 dialed in.
Okay, do we want to take a quick beat to try to identify those folks? Okay, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that now.
Okay, so this is Kelly in the meeting room. We have 2 people on the phone, and you may also be logged in on your computer. But if the people, a person with the phone number ending 0010 can identify themselves, please. And then there's a second person, 0521. Should I,
Hello, this is John. Is that me? Are you looking
oh,
for me?
yes. Hi, John.
Yeah, thanks. Hey guys, I've been listening. Sorry.
And then-
Yeah, sorry. Apologize. I was calling from my work line.
No worries. And the person calling from 0010, that's the last 4 digits of the phone number. If you could identify yourself. And then there's a person online, GFast.
That's me. It's actually Greg Faust. I misspelled my name.
Thanks, Greg. And if anybody online, and we have a few people in the room, just so you know, is not on our distribution list, please feel free to email us and we'll make sure you're getting these invites directly.
We have an email at the end of the slides that you can email the team.
And it's in the chat.
And in the chat, thank you. So we'll go ahead and move on. We're not getting any disruption from our unknown caller, so we'll just keep going.
So that's great. Oh, no, our unknown caller. You're right. Sorry.
Okay, so now we're going to move on and talk about the phase 2 river work plan. As a reminder, this is a work plan that we are currently developing responses to regulator and tribe comments, so it's not finalized at this point. We will talk at a higher level about what we're planning to do, and then those details will continue to be finalized with the reviewers. We are looking to get out in the field starting in September of this year. We are working, as we finalize the work plan, we're working with Bonneville Dam about restrictions for doing in-water work up there. There are restrictions based on certain times of years, especially with fish migration and things like that. So our actual sampling dates might change in the future. We will communicate that as any changes are made. And I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to Jacobs to talk through these phase 2 river wetland slides.
Thanks, Megan. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so this is Jay Wilburn. I'm a project manager with Jacobs. Also on the line, we got Gary Colgan, who's one of our senior technical experts with Jacobs also, and we're a contractor with the Army Corps, working also with Kelly and Lisa that are in the room there. So as Megan laid out, kind of going over more in a general sense of what is upcoming with the phase 2 supplemental remedial investigation following the phase 1 activities that Megan just presented. So the overall objectives for the phase 2 work is investigate the river operable unit, for the presence of contaminants in surface and subsurface materials. And also with that, determine if there's any non-aqueous phase liquid, or it's also called NAPL, along the north shore of Bradford Island. And with that reference to the non-aqueous phase liquid, we've got a picture in there for folks that aren't really familiar with that. And it's basically a product that is not mixed in with the water itself. And as you see the picture there, there's the darker material, which is the product with the water floating on top. That would be considered a dense non-aqueous phase liquid, meaning that it's heavier than the water. And there's also a light non-aqueous phase liquid, which would be lighter and it would be floating on the water itself. So we're also looking for that is one of the objectives. And within the work plan itself, we kind of have some sub areas for kind of split up based on management areas, and also for sampling kind of management. But there's the forebay, and I'll show some pictures of these here in a bit. But we've got the forebay and the Bradford Island North Shore and East Shores, and the Bradford Island South Shore, Eagle Creek area, and area around Goose Island and Goose Island itself, and also downriver. So looking at where these areas are. So Bradford Island is right here. This is the east side of Bradford Island. Cascade Island's up over here. This kind of purplish outline here is considered the forebay area. And then as we get closer to the island, Bradford Island itself, we have the North Shore of Bradford Island, which is, this area in here. And here's the former debris piles that Megan was talking about earlier. And then along here, we have the East Shore of Bradford Island. And then this along the whole area here where this yellow outline is the South Shore area. And then Eagle Creek here. And then Goose Island is up here, upriver a little bit here, but we've got Goose Island, which is highlighted in the green area there. And then looking downriver itself, so Bradford Island is here. And so going downriver is the highlighted orange area where we'll be doing sampling. And these areas are also, you'll see these areas of the kind of land masses itself, where there's Pierce Island and Eves Island. And those are kind of highlighted around like that, where we're not sampling on the island themselves, but, off the shore of these islands themselves. Okay. So the different sampling methods that we'll be using is more or less based on the type of material that we expect to find within the subsurface itself. So in the softer sediment areas, we'll use a method with a vibrocore and a Ponar grab sample, which is the grab sample is essentially meant for surface samples, and the vibrocore goes down deeper. And then areas where there's potential having shallow bedrock and moderate to even larger rocks, we'll use a sonic drilling rig that's on a barge itself. Or in areas where it's not quite as as rocky, we may have an opportunity to use a freeze core and a freeze grab sampling method, or just a regular grab sampling method. And those areas would probably be a little less rocky, not quite as large rocks that as would be needed for the sonic drilling itself. And then we are going to sample on Goose Island itself, on the actual landmass of Goose Island, and we'll be using a sonic drill rig on the land itself. So I'll present a little bit of these methods here. And so for the vibrocore, which I was saying is kind of in the softer sediment areas, and so that would be actually maybe kind of go back here. So the softer sediment areas, we'd expect kind of softer sediment areas here in the South Shore area here, and then also along Eagle Creek here, and then we are going to do some sampling in between the Oregon shoreline and Goose Island itself. And so in here we kind of expect to have softer sediment areas there, and then also downriver we expect to have softer sediments. And so with that, we can use a vibrocore system to collect the samples, the sediment samples themselves. We're looking to go about 10 feet down, and in that methodology basically uses it's called a Lexane tube, but essentially kind of a plastic type tube, and it's vibrated and pushed down from a boat that's similar to these pictures here, and then it collects a core of the sediment. Then you'd pull it up. So in these pictures here, they're lining up and push, and actually they've just pulled up a core here out of the water and from the sediment. And then the second picture here shows the liner itself that's filled up with sediment and to collect the sample. And then in those same areas where we have softer sediment, we don't have a lot of rocks, we'll collect the grab samples using what they call a Ponar grab or a Van Veen sampler. And those areas are essentially kind of where we're going to grab a surface sample. And these pictures here show a picture of the Ponar grab sampler, and essentially you can see it's kind of a clamshell opening there, and that gets lowered down into the sediment. And then the second picture here, it closes, and when you pull it up, the sediment's in there, and there's you have a good seal on it because the water stays in there, and so you'll have the water that's on top, and then after that water's been drained off, you've got the soft sediment here that can be sampled. So with the sonic drilling, which we'll do actually on Goose Island itself, I've got a couple of pictures here showing a sonic drill rig, and these are actually pictures of the drilling activities that we just recently done for the Upland operable unit, because we used a sonic drill rig out there. And so there's a picture of the rig here, and then obviously this is a smaller sonic rig. It's track mounted and can get around in some pretty rough terrain. And here they are, driving that in. And the way that sonic drilling method works is basically has a core that vibrates and also turns a bit and has a drill bit on the end and can drill down. And when you pull it up, the sample's inside the core itself. So we would be using the same type of drilling method for sonic in areas where there's shallow bedrock or coarser rocks, and those areas like in the Forebay area or around the east side and the north side of Bradford Island, and also probably on the north side of Goose Island, we expect to have pretty rocky material there. And so we'll use a sonic drilling method that's on a barge itself. And so the same kind of setup as if it was on land, but it's actually drilling from the barge. Here's a picture of an example of a barge. This is actually kind of a smaller version of what the barge could look like. It could be much larger. And here's the drill rig. It's set up on a drill, a well hole there, and basically they just drill through the center of the barge. And and with a setup like this, it allows you to push and get much deeper and drill into the bedrock. You can have a lot more force from the barge itself, and pull up a sediment or even a bedrock core from that. And then lastly, there's another method that we could use in areas where it's potentially rocky, but like I said, not probably as rocky as out in the forebay, but we would use a freeze core, or also a freeze grab sampler. And this is an interesting type of sampler where you drive the rod into the subsurface. And here's a picture of it here. And then they put a freezing agent like liquid nitrogen or dry ice down the center of it. And what it causes is the material directly around the rod itself to freeze. And so you pull that up, and then you end up with a mixture of fine materials mixed in with some rocky materials that is thawed out on the surface, and then you sample it. And then the same kind of setup where for surface samples, you essentially put this in these little spuds on the bottom. You put the freezing agent into those, and it causes the base of that to freeze. And then when you pull that up, you get this frozen mass of fine materials with rocky materials that you can pull up. One of the advantages of the freeze core versus the sonic on a barge is the freeze core sampler and the freeze grab sampler can be done from a much smaller boat and versus the larger barge. So it does allow you to get closer to the island or landmass, wherever you might be, versus with the larger barge, you're kind of limited by how close that barge can really get to the land itself. That was kind of about it. Yep. And so if there's any questions.
This is Mitch Patton again. Hey, on the forebay area there,
Mhm.
on the south side or the north side, do we have any like sonar or anything that indicates what that around where the bottom of the river shoreline? Looks
Yes,
like
as far as depth to the bottom and all, yes, we have data that we have to be able to use to determine how deep we have to go. There may be some areas in the forebay area that are up to 120 feet deep.
I guess then the other part of that question was, seeing how that area is so close to the spillway there of that area, what kind of currents over the years has that seen? I'm thinking like massive currents that went through there over the years when the gates are open.
Right.
Could that be assumed that it's like really, really fast through there and a huge vacuum and sucking material out there as we could possibly get into the river?
So we'll be, I know that's probably not what you're quite asking, but we will be sampling during when the spillways close for safety purposes. And as far as sampling within the forebay area, that's one of the reasons why we would expect to have very rocky type material, because there's such the water moves through there pretty fast, and when the spillways open, it does scour that any sediment that potentially could have set settled down there, that is scoured out. And so, so we're using that sonic drilling method to be able to get through the rockier material and also see what's in the subsurface.
Potentially, we could be looking at the contamination gone.
Yeah, I'll expand on that a little bit too. Yeah, there is, because we do expect every spillway open there to be sediment kind of washing through that area. You're absolutely right that sediment and contaminated materials could pass through the spillway. And that is something that we're investigating with that downstream investigation. So those areas that we're targeting in the that orange area that was showed on our slide, we're looking to target areas that we believe sediment would kind of flow into and settle down there.
That's all.
Any other questions from our RAB members? Any questions from the community? I'm not seeing any other hands up or any hands in the room, so we can move on. Okay, so that is the end of our technical status discussions. Moving on to talk about the RAB meeting dates. So our next meeting will be September 9th. There had been a request to look at the Dalles and look at Good River. We were able to book a location at the Good River Library. So that information is on the slide, but shortly after this meeting, in the next week or so, I'll be sending out the invite for the next meeting that will have all of that in person. And of course, as usual, there'll be a hybrid option as well. Following that, our meeting dates are November 4th and January 13th. We are currently planning those as online, as we typically move to online only when we get into the wetter, colder months, when it's less safe to travel around the gorge, or at least less reliably safe to travel around the gorge. We do have some potential topics that we're carrying forward into our future meetings. I believe it was at the last meeting, there was a request to get more information about the fish sampling effort that the state of Washington had conducted downriver at Bonneville Dam. EPA has agreed to put together a presentation on that, and they'll be discussing that at our September meeting. And then we'll also be providing an overview of Cascades Island. We've talked about it at a high level at this meeting a number of times. But now it's a new operable unit. At a future meeting, we'll go a little bit deeper into the preliminary assessment, findings, history of the site, etc. Just give everybody a little better understanding, much like we did in the first, I believe it was the first or second RAB meeting, we did the same for the upland and the river operable units. It'll be similar to that. From our RAB members, are there any topics that you would like us to add as topics for future meetings? Let us move right along to the next slide then. So now this is our time for RAB discussion and public open forum. We'll start with the RAB discussion, and I want to open it up to talk about first a question that came up for PCB impacts on migratory fish. I'll ask you all to bear with me for a second because I got a few different pieces of information from a couple different sources here. So related to this question, there was a question before about the life expectancy of smallmouth bass and whether there were any studies about the differences of life expectancy in the Bonneville Dam area, especially above the dam, and the life expectancy of smallmouth bass throughout the rest of Columbia. So just a quick background for anyone who's not familiar with this fish. This is what we call a resident fish. It doesn't travel much in its lifespan. It doesn't migrate to the ocean like salmon does. They eat a lot of bottom feeder type creatures. And because of that, those fish that are around Bradford Island that stay there for most of their life, they pick up quite a bit of contamination from bottom feeder critters. And so they're quite contaminated in that area. And there is a advisory from Oregon Health Authority as well as other partner authorities to not eat smallmouth bass between the dam itself and 1 mile of the river. So I reached out to a research biologist at the USGS and Western Fisheries Research Center. Toby Cockey's presented to us before in the past. And this was his response regarding life expectancy. In general, maximum life expectancy for smallmouth bass can be over 10 years. Most populations are comprised primarily of fish less than 5 years old. For the Columbia, I think that's pretty accurate as well. I'm almost completely certain that nobody has conducted a study and thus has data to compare age class distributions between smallmouth bass in the Bonneville Dam Forebay, and other locations in the Columbia River. So that is the general response. So they can live to be around 10 years old or older. They're mostly up to 5 years or so, or most of them are kind of around that age. And that there's no known difference around Bonneville versus the Columbia. It does not seem that there's been any studies to determine that. If folks are interested, I can ask the author of that email if I can send it on the RAB numbers. We could probably take out their personal info, like their cell phone or whatever, but I can ask that if folks are interested in seeing that whole email to them.
Yeah, this is Mitch again. Yeah, you can send that to me. I guess from what I gathered, his email is that these fish live 5 to 10 years, 10 years at the most, but in that 10-year period, they're absorbing PCB levels that are like off the charts, just in that little small period.
Yeah, that PCB levels can what they call bioaccumulate. So they because their food source can be contaminated, they can get more contamination. This was talked about at a previous RAB meeting in the May meeting minutes. There's links to the actual RAB meetings that talk deeper about this. But the fish in the area, one of the reasons we see such a variation of contamination as well is they can actually move around 10 to 20 miles through their life. So they're not just necessarily just hanging out just in the forebay. But those that spend a significant amount of time around that area can be picking up quite a lot of contamination. At least potentially, that's what we believe is. We know that they have, there are particular fish that we've sampled that tested high with PCBs, quite high.
This is Mitch again, and that's just, I got an email from a person that I know this afternoon about this exact thing and saying that these resident fish, the bass do travel up to 20 miles out of that. So, I mean, these fish that are there could be 20 miles upstream very easily, but yet people can catch them and eat them.
Yeah. Yeah, so they can move quite a lot. So their food source could be varied. They could have low contamination, they could have high contamination. And there actually is evidence that they can move through the dam as well. So moving back to that Washington downstream fish sampling that was conducted separate from the Bradford Island project. We'll talk about that more in September. But they were sampling resident fish that were downstream of Bonneville Dam to, I believe it was 5 miles. And they'll be able to, when EPA comes back in September, they'll be able to talk more to that specific information. I do see though, Rich has his hand up. Rich, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, first I want to say I'm sorry. We really wanted to have this done today and have this topic talked about, but my ecological risk assessor, Matt Luxon, I really wanted him to talk on this because he can talk about everything from the migratory patterns to the possibility of catching fish downstream, or if you're fishing in a population that that is, if you have a fish or a certain percentage of fish that traveled to a different area and they mix in with that population, what that means for if you're catching those fish and things like that. And he's a really valuable resource, and I didn't want to take away from that. But yeah, he's on leave right now and won't be back until September, or won't be available until the September one. But it's a good presentation, so um, apologies that he's not here today.
So more
I
to
would
come.
I would do it, but I wouldn't do it justice for sure.
More to come on the resident fish and the questions that have come up about that. I did want to also go to a question that was brought up regarding PCB impacts on migratory fish. So Mitch brought this up via email asking if we could discuss this during the RAB discussion. So we can move on to that topic next. I did reach out to, here we go. I reached out to Dana Crosby and Todd Hudson over at OHA, asking them or letting them know that there would be some discussion or some potential questions coming up if they were able to attend. It does look like they said that one of them would be able to make it. Do we either have Dana or Todd online?
Hi, Megan. This is Megan Christian from OHA, and I'm actually the fish advisory person for OHA. So I'm here instead of Dana, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Megan Christian, thanks for joining. Mitch, I'll turn
course.
it over to you to ask your question.
Okay, yeah, this is Mitch Path again. The question that I keep running through my head is that when these steelhead, the Columbia River, they're pretty aggressive fish. Anything on the bottom of that dam pool as they're resting before they go up the ladders, they're gonna eat that crawdad. They're gonna eat that stuff. The cohos went to the Wind River and Reno Lake are a very aggressive salmon that eat. I mean, they just whack on the lure. So they're not like your fall Chinook that just run up there and want to spawn out and die. These other fish are pretty aggressive in their feeding habits. I believe personally that they're eating stuff on the bottom of that dam pool, above and below. So the question is, if they do happen to eat a crawdad or some plant life or whatever as they're munching around, how long does it take for that PCB, because it's going to be a highly contaminated material, to get into that meat that somebody's going to consume? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a super valid question. Because I don't know about you, I love eating steelhead and salmon. So what we think about, and I appreciate your distinguishing between, a Chinook, which is really going to stop feeding when they enter the freshwater. They're going to go and spawn. You're correct. And to my understanding as well, that steelhead are a little bit different. Their feeding habits are going to decrease. But they are still probably going to feed on things as they make their way upriver. The reason why they are a safe and healthy choice is because they're not spending the amount of time in the area of contamination that something like a bass or those other what we call resident fish are. And so even if they do, let's say, eat a crawdad or two from the bottom of the dam pool, we still likely the levels of contaminant will still remain below the screening levels or what we really, they're not going to accumulate to those high levels of contamination that the resident fish are that are living kind of day in and day out in that contaminated sediment and are fully eating from the contaminated area. So our approach for migratory, and when I say migratory, I want to be specific. Those salmon, steelhead, and shad are those safe and healthy eating options, because while they might eat 1 or 2 items as they pass through, they're not spending the amount of time that's needed in the area of contamination to really accumulate enough contamination to be harmful to people's health. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of does, but it still leaves the door wide open to me that crawdad that it just ate is one of the highest contaminated PCB levels as what the resident bass are gonna have. This steelhead or salmon just ate this thing. It swims up past the Dalles Dam. It's had a week to digest that PCB. And how long does it take before it actually gets in the meat of microfilm fish?
Yeah, I don't know if Rich or Megan know the metabolism time of well, they don't metabolize the PCB, the fish, which is the issue. That's why it stays in the tissue and in the fats and the lipids of the fish. I think maybe a perspective is that you're 100% correct. You know, when it's going to eat that contaminated crawdad, the fish is going to have PCBs in it. However, that fish is going to maybe only eat 1 or 2, maybe, let's say, of those crawdads, and then it's going to go on to its spawning grounds. Whereas that resident bass, even if the bass has that range, like Megan was talking about, of 10 miles, it's going to be coming up and down. It's going to be spending that 5 to 10 years of its life interacting with the contaminated sediment and eating those. Let's just keep using crawdads as an example, you know, continually over many years, eating those crawdads, eating other smaller fish that have eaten contaminated species from the area. And so that's why we distinguish that migratory fish like the salmon, steelhead, and shad from the resident fish, because where we get PCB levels that are really harmful to people's health accumulating in the fish tissue is because those fish are spending large amounts of time in that contaminated area. And that's kind of the basis of what they're eating, you know, over years of their lifespan. Does that get at what I hear your concern, Midge, 100%.
I understand what you're saying. I still feel if you eat a contaminated crawdad, that's PCB levels are off the charts. Whether you only ate 1 or 2 of them, it can't be good. That's what I guess what my point is, why are we saying that the migratory fish are fine to eat when my thought is it's a liability to tell people that these fish are okay to eat?
So Valerie here, I think maybe this is something we can continue. I know Rich said, I think this pod is coming in September. I think the part that I'm having trouble understanding is we have the most PCB contaminated river, I believe, in the nation. I think that's correct. Am I saying that correctly? I believe it.
No, there are some of the fish that we have sampled are some of the highest.
Okay, the highest sample for PCBs. So
River, we're still
Yeah.
investigating.
right, and so I'm not under. I guess maybe in September we could talk more about. Are we talking like by volume, by species? I'm just trying to understand what that means when we say we have samples with the highest PCB contamination. I'm not sure I'm understanding how that affects the ecosystem, the fish, resident fish, migratory fish. Does that affect, we have a lot of raptors in the area. Does that affect that? And we have consumption. So I'm not understanding it. So hopefully in September, Rich and our expert will be able to maybe address it. I just understand the sampling and how that all fits in. I'm not totally understanding.
Yeah, it does sound like that's going to be a good source of information for understanding the fish in general better. So it'll be a great time to ask questions and consider those questions. I'll also point folks to a couple of our previous meetings. In our May meetings, and I put the links in. But we did have a couple times that folks came and talked about this. So there are a couple other recorded meetings you can refer back to, especially for those that weren't involved in the RAB yet. You can go back and get some more information that was already discussed. And I see Asa has his hand up. Go ahead, Asa.
Yeah, is this a good subject for another meeting to go and expand into the data on the fish that wasn't covered in previous meetings? Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so we'll be talking more in September about the fish. We can see what other comments and questions come up at that point. But we'll definitely have more folks here in September to talk to the deep technical details of that. Thank you.
This is Rich Francis. I can say that, you know, Matt, he's going to be able to answer a lot of your questions. I think one thing that he won't be able to answer, and something that EPA doesn't stake a position on, is the safety of migratory fish versus the contaminated resident fish. We don't participate in the fish advisory. We will have a fish advisory whenever remedial action starts, but that is specific to the action. And I think those questions as to why one thing is safe and why another thing is safe is probably best directed to OHA.
So I can give some contact information if you want to reach out separately. I'll just make sure with the folks at OHA that they're okay with that contact information being sent out, or I'll get like a public inbox that they can respond through. And then one of the previous meetings I referred to, we did have OHA come in and talk for a while about that Bonneville Resident Fish Advisory. They talked about the process of how they went through creating it, and with the different agencies that they created it with, and their justification for the what they produced. So that'll be, if folks are able to spend the time, that's definitely a great meeting to listen to before coming into the next September meeting. But otherwise, I will, again, I'll let folks from OHA know that we're planning on having some discussion. If they're able to attend, they may be able to field some additional questions there.
This is Mitch Pattigan, and I think it'd be really interesting to see at the next meeting what the results are from the findings they found in the fish themselves below the dam.
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, they were sampling fish clear down to Skamania land, I think.
I think
That's
it was
quite a
5
ways.
miles downriver. Is that right, Rich?
That's quite
Yeah,
a ways down.
they took samples just past Ives Island and up in. They even took some fish up in that. If you have a map, the area, the kind of shallow area north of Ives Island, and that little part of the river that's just underneath or just south of where North Bonneville is. So they did take fish samples from around those areas for sure. And that's part of Matt's presentation. He can tell you generally where they picked them up from, but you can't get like an exact these GPS coordinates where we picked up this particular fish. They didn't get down to that level of detail whenever I guess they zapped them. They just gave them like an electric shock and then kind of scooped them up. Yeah. I'll say this though, and I don't want to give too much. It's interesting the way Matt describes it, and I would really like to hear him talk about it.
We do have a couple minutes left in the meeting. I want to give an opportunity for any other discussion points, both from the RAB and the public. Open to RAB members, any other discussion points that we want to briefly touch on here?
It's Mitch, the only one I'm going to bring back up the point of, I think ASA said that they would start or try to talk to the rest of the commissioners on posting, but also maybe contact our city council. North Bonneville has city council. And then the same thing on the Oregon side, Cascade Locks, and then the post these meetings, because I think it's very simple to put them on the page. People are surfing through, that follow meetings and stuff can say, oh yeah, that's right. There's a RAB meeting on this day. So I kind of think, and I don't know who's supposed to, is it something that we as RAB members do, or is it something that Army Corps does, or something EPA does?
Yeah, it's both the responsibility of the Corps and the RAB members to disseminate information. So on the RAB, we'll definitely be reaching out. We took an action to reach out to some of the local county commissions,
Yeah.
city commissions to ask about posting the meeting information to their websites or anywhere that they can share that. I also encourage the RAB members to also reach out to any organizations you want to, any other city, county governments, state governments as you see fit. And of course, any members of the public, if you want to spread the information, you're more than welcome. Those of us on the board have the duty to do so, of course.
I know the lady at the Dallas that I spoke with, I think you spoke with her too. It sounded like that Moscow County, I should say, it sounded like the only issue was the dates that we had our meetings was dates that their building facility was in use.
Yeah, there was, I'm blanking on the exact facility, but there was the one that we were looking at to hold meetings. They have their commission meetings the exact same day and time.
Right, that's what she said.
Yeah.
And so I'm going like, I wonder if there's something, because she seemed really concerned that basically they had no idea what Bradford was, and they're so close to it that they didn't know. So I'm just wondering if it wouldn't somehow, some way, we could say, okay, let's hold a meeting in between, because we could move that date from the Tuesdays or whatever that we hold these things on to coincide with that building being open to be held at the Moscow County.
Yeah, we can look at that. We do have the September in-person set. We can look at that for future meetings when we're in the spring and we're coming back to in-person hybrid.
Right.
Any other questions from our RAB members? Okay. From our public members, do you have any questions or discussion points that you'd like to bring up today?
The question is good.
Okay, and this, it doesn't really apply to anything, but I noticed those hundreds of fishermen fishing a couple of weeks ago. And this was to come. And, I mean, lined up, I mean, there were 100 cars, and all these guys were fishing, and I don't know what they were fishing.
Shad.
Anybody know?
I'm not too familiar with the different fishing.
Yeah, they eat it.
Never seen so many cars in front of the fish.
Go look to the fish feed with the Sunday with the shad. The fish feed full of shad. It's crazy.
There's also spots that the fish are able to move through the dam. So there will be people that will target specific spots because the fish will kind of get bundled in and out. Yes.
They're fishing, but that would be what's considered as that migratory. Travels through, but they're an aggressive.
They get through. So where is the original? And they're heading west, right?
They have different spawning areas up in different parts of the Columbia and rivers that contribute to it.
Can I get your name for the record, please?
Yeah, my first name is called.
Thank you.
And like Mitch said, any question, any comment is perfectly welcome here. We've had a number of great suggestions that started off with the phrase, "This is a dumb question, but." They never are dumb.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we are very happy to have you here. So thank you for joining us. Okay, any other questions from members of the public, either in person or online? Okay, so that brings us to the end of our agenda. I will open it up for a motion to close the meeting.
I'll motion to close the meeting.
I'll second that.
All right. That's a motion and a second for closing the meeting. That is sufficient. Thank you all for your time and your attention today, your great questions and discussions. We'll see you in September.